Hello and welcome to AIL TV. As usual, it is 6 o'clock. Of course, it's a couple of minutes past 6. Um, Tonight, of course, we are still practicing social distancing. Virtually or remotely, we have got David Otto from Siso, stepped in, step out. There, and his guest, Nana. They will be talking. Basically, they are continuing to discuss the challenges that there is in Cameroon, and also, but we're going to start with Mozambique, because as many of you might know or don't know, Mozambique is actually gripped with a lot of terrorism activities. I am not the expert. You have got the experts here tonight on the panel, and if you have got any questions, please send them over. Now I'm going to hand over to David Otto. David, you are on.
Thank you again, Mr. Joseph Otieno Adamson, for ever being present and making sure that we successfully host this program on Africans in London television. I want to appreciate once more our viewers, professionals, academics, students, but also the general public, for taking interest into these subject matters that we're discussing. As Mr. Joseph said, today we shall be discussing, again, going back to updates on Africa security issues. We will be talking about Mozambique. We will also be discussing the issues that are going on, the insurgency that is going on in Cameroon, and some very specific events which happened very lately, which I think our guests want to give you some analysis on. Again, thank you very much, everyone, for always sending in your questions for us. We have two guests today, which we promised to bring to you. Mr. Salinana, who is a certified anti-terrorism specialist. He's from Cameroon, and he is somebody with very wide knowledge on matters of security in Africa, matters of security in Cameroon. He speaks internationally. So I think I brought him today because I want him to give us his expert opinion on what is going on in Cameroon specifically. But also we were supposed to have one of our seasoned security analysts, Jasmine Operman from South Africa. But unfortunately, because of some technical issues, she's not been able to join us at the moment. We're hoping that as the show goes on, as the program goes on, she will be able to catch up with us. Also, we just want to let you know it's a very, very hot weather in the UK, and I'm sure in most of the areas where, within the Western Hemisphere. I'm sure in Africa it's quite different, but, we're experiencing a very, hot, scenario. So when you see us, we're transpiring, please just bear with us. It's quite hot. More than 30, I think about 34, 35 degrees, Fahrenheit. So, yes, today we will be talking a lot about what is going on I think we should begin talking about what is going on in Mozambique. And as Mr. Joseph said, Mozambique is one of those maritime states that is experiencing what I describe as the new frontier of the Islamic State movement. There's a frontier that has been ongoing for the past 3 years in the region, known as the northern part of Mozambique, in a particular region known as Cabo Delgado. It's a province of Mozambique in the far north area of Mozambique. But what we've seen in the past, years is this group, has been able to colonize some of the territories, to use that word. They've been able to take control of these territories. And when I say control, I don't mean that you don't have government forces in these areas. You do have government forces, but the the daily activities of citizens has been restricted by this movement, which has come up. People no longer feel safe to live in these areas. People are moving away from these areas. And, some reports are saying that, there's been more than 1,000 people killed during this period of time. But also, you have hundreds of thousands of people that have been displaced, as a result of this Islamic State movement. They call themselves actually Al-Shabaab. And Al-Shabaab is a name which they got from, as most of you would know, they got from the Somalian-based Al-Shabaab. But the reason why they call them Al-Shabaab, perhaps is, kind of trying to compare them and compare their modus operandi. They are trying to take over from, not from, the government of Mozambique, in Mozambique entirely, but they're taking over the local administration of Cabo Delgado province. So, they're seen as Al-Shabaab within the local communities. But they call themselves, Al-Sunnah wa Jama'ah, which is a movement that believes in the Prophet Muhammad, and they claim that they are fighting for the protection of Muslims in Mozambique. They claim that they are there to protect the Muslims in that region. So these are the kind of narratives that we see within these areas of Mozambique. Now, as of late, they have actually captured one of the port cities of Mocímboa de Praia. And this is an area which, is extremely, extremely rich, in the sense that, you've got, an investment of more than 50 billion, in the, and this is an area where it's referred to as, Africa's Qatar, because there is a lot of gas, there is a lot of oil within this region. It's very rich. But unfortunately, you have a scenario where the occupants, or the majority of the people that live in the northern part of Mozambique, have complained of experiencing marginalization, complain of underdevelopment, of unemployment. So it's the same kind of narrative where we see Islamic State organizations, taking over from, the lack of governance, taking over from an area which there is a lot of people complaining of poverty, people complaining of discrimination. And, most of the people in this region see themselves as having been abandoned by the government in Maputo, which is, the capital of Mozambique. So, again, this is a very, it's an emerging situation, because after the collapse of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, we've seen, as we've talked about, we've seen a steady flow of foreign fighters, going to these regions in Africa, and Mozambique, unfortunately, is one of them. But when I talk to people who are basically stationed in Mozambique, one of the things that we hear about is the fact that these movements are very, kind of national movements. So even though they have this, Islamic, Wahhabist ideology within them, we still talk about the movement that is very local, that has local, grievances, that relies on local, means of living, means of, they recruit locally, they get their arms from local arms dealers, they engage with organized crime groups. So I think there is this growing concern. And because Mozambique is situated somewhere geographically between East and South Africa, there's a huge concern by SADC, which is the South African Development Corporation, but also by EAC, which is the East African Community, on whose responsibility is it? Is it kind of a joint responsibility from SADC, which is the South African Development Corporation, or is it an exclusive responsibility from the East African Community? But again, this comes down to the same scenario that we see happening in the Lake Chad region, where we believe that it is important for either or both of the East African community and the South African community to get involved in this. So let me talk to Mr. Salinana about, because there's a lot of concern about the recruitment of these jihadists, Mr. Sali. You have experience in terrorist organizations that rely on forms of recruitment. Where do you think they get their support from and they have their recruitment from your own experience?
Right. So different sort of terrorist organizations have different levels of organizations. They may start from fairly ideological demands or economic demands, or demands of being included in power sharing and things like that. And then quickly they sort of develop into various agendas. Yeah. So part of the drivers of the movement in Mozambique is largely economic, as you hinted. Cabo Delgado is a very rich province, yeah. So that is obviously a big driver. The fact that the resources of that, so the recruitment will be along the lines of, if we get hold of our region, then we get control of all these our resources. Yeah. The other sort of like recruitment kind of tactics will be the use of force. We have seen that, like the case of child soldiers, or the case of captives in Iraq, whereby groups kind of get hold of people, women or even young people, by force, and then kind of recruit them into their movement. So, but the movement then move on to various things like trafficking, and that will involve trafficking of various resources and smuggling various minerals resources, for example. And the kind of motivation for recruitment will be various things. Some will be economic, some will be political ideology, some of the drivers will be even ethnic and religious. In the case of this group, the religious ideology about restoring the true Islam in Cabo Delgado is one of the recruitment sort of hooks. Right. Yeah. That they want to restore. So there's a strong religious element, but then that quickly moves on to various other agendas.
And in terms of that, you made a very good point in terms of the level of recruitment. But what we've also seen in Mozambique is, the people on the ground are saying this particular jihadist organization, they use the Swahili language, which is spoken in Tanzania, which is spoken in Kenya. In most of the East African countries, you've got Swahili speakers. And of course, there is another language which is called the Kimwani language, which is the mother of the Swahili language. Some of them also speak this language. There are parts of the organization that speak Portuguese. Now, does that mean that there is a possibility of them attracting, their recruits from this language? I mean, from an ethnic perspective, or from areas where people speak the same language in East Africa?
Absolutely. So language is one of the kind of opportunities for this group to recruit from within the Swahili-speaking populations of Kenya and Tanzania, and maybe parts of Somalia. As we mentioned earlier, they are mimicking the name of Al-Shabaab, which means youth, which was used in Somalia. So the language is a kind of unifying force, but it is also a kind of tool that people use for identity merchandising. So they will be able to market themselves as we are brothers, we speak one language and the language unites us. So therefore, it will be attractive to someone who speaks Swahili to get, it will be more attractive to them to get into that movement in Mozambique than if it was just a Portuguese speaking or a group that speaks only a local language. So definitely speaking Swahili internationalizes the conflict in to make it sub-regional to the Swahili speaking countries that are around Mozambique. So definitely the language is just like the religion of Islam. The language is also both a unifying force and also a tool for them, and it's also an advantage for them. So in terms of smuggling, for example, or selling kind of smuggled goods across that region, then the Swahili language becomes a very good tool for trade, for whatever resources that they are able to gather from Cabo Delgado region to either Tanzania, Uganda, sort of Kenya, and all these areas, and it will feel like we're just one, we're brothers, and we're just helping each other because we speak this one language.
I think that makes a lot of sense, you know. But when you also compare this with what used to happen in Nigeria, you know, when Boko Haram declared Goza as its capital in 2014, you know, you could see that, you know, when we played the video, you know, you could see the same way that these guys had used to, you know, see some of the arms from the military, and they're displaying it on the streets. You know, we saw this in 2014 and 2015 in Nigeria, and we've seen the same thing happening in Mozambique. But it's interesting that you know, you've mentioned the impact of language, especially when it comes to operations, because you know what you don't want within a jihadist organization is that language barrier where communication can be very difficult to flow between one unit to another. So you need a common language, and we can see that there is this uniqueness, you know, within this group when it comes to language, because you know they speak mostly the Swahili language, you know, of course Kimwani, which is part of Swahili, Portuguese, and some of them speak the Makua, which is, you know, another local language. You know a lot about you know, Boko Haram as well, and you find that language also plays a role, ethnicity role. I mean, the leadership of Boko Haram came from, you know, the Kanuri society, because most of the top leaders, you know, Mohammed Yusuf, Abubakar Shekau, Abu Musab al-Banawi, you know, Khalid al-Banawi, Mamanu, of course, you know, is a Shua Arab. But most of the top leadership of Boko Haram, Abubakar Balawan, they speak Kanuri language. And the leaders of these organizations have, you know, primarily come from that, you know, particular region. Do you see the same thing happening where you would have for example, the Swahilis being leading the movement? And what is the impact of that, you know, from your experience?
Yes, so the language, as you mentioned earlier, is very important because obviously it will be used for training, it will be used for instructions, and it will be used as a tool, a unifying tool for the group. So in the case of Boko Haram, they mostly use the Hausa language instead of the Kanuri. But in terms of the commanders and in terms of keeping the secrets of the organization, and even for the ease of communication, most of them will use the Kanuri language rather than Hausa language, which is that every person understands. And if they wanted to hide something from the military, probably, if the military came from the south or something, then probably they would prefer to speak in Kanuri. And this is what will happen with the group in Mozambique. So if they wanted to hide things from the Portuguese-speaking military of Mozambique, then Swahili becomes very important as a coding language for war, because every kind of conflict needs some kind of coding, some kind of code of communication. So that will help them in trying to conserve their secrets and also trying to engender brotherhood. Because one of the major selling points of Islamic movements is the concept of ummah, is the fact that we are all one, and so we're fighting for the ummah. So the language will cement that kind of ideology. So I think that is a very is also strategically important, because they can use it across the countries that are across the region, but also use it internally in their strategic and tactical operations. And also, most of the recruits into these movements are people that have not been to Western education, so they may not speak Portuguese or English or any other Western language, but then they will likely speak a local language very easily. And if you have a large number of Swahili speaking people within that movement, then it's possible that they even impact the language or teach other people to speak to the language, and also try and maybe adapt it as a lingua franca, because that is to their advantage. They can use it to their advantage, and they can internationalize the conflict using the language. In the case of Boko Haram, Hausa has become the lingua franca of northern Nigeria. So that was already the case, that Hausa is a lingua franca, and a lot of people in the military and the security services speak Hausa. But then the people who speak the sort of the fighters will use Kanuri probably for operations and in strategic meetings between the commanders, and that is a very important tool. It's almost like us using Skype or Zoom for meetings. This is how these languages also serve these people as a vehicle of communication. So it is very important. In the case of Central African Republic, for example, the Fulbe militias, the Seleka factions that are led by the Fulbe, largely speak Fulfulde. And you saw that in a recent propaganda video that was filmed in in Adamawa region of Cameroon. You realize that the person who was claiming to be the commander was speaking in Fulfulde before speaking in French, because there is not only a symbolic value to him speaking Fulfulde, it kind of conjures some kind of unifying kind of force, and kind of like a cohesive kind of element for the group, and to serve as a unifying factor, but also strategically to send a particular message that we are Fulfulde speaking and we want to take over the country, and we attach the language to the identity of the Fulbe. So the issue of language is not very light. It's something that is a big tool to be used. Like in Central Africa, if people were thinking that anti-Balaka were approaching the Fulbe militias, then they will give orders in Fulfulde. And that might mean that even if anti-Balaka were to listen into their communications, they might find it difficult to understand what they are talking about. Especially if they go into deep kind of Fulfulde, that only a native speaker might understand what they say. So it's a kind of, they use it for coding purposes, and also for they manipulate people and to give the impression that, look, we are one, we are brothers, we understand each other, and we watch each other's back.
I think that you've made some very, very good points there, because when you look at the trajectory of what is happening now in Mozambique, and as you rightly said, language is an important component. And you compare that to what is happening in Nigeria, I see some similarities in terms of how these movements are growing and how the use of language is important. But also, you know, if you look at it from the reverse engineering on the security perspective, is how do you then reverse this, you know, this language as a counter narrative? Because again, if you've got to infiltrate these organizations for information gathering purposes, if you've got to use information to create awareness, if you have to use information to channel your strategic messaging, which, you know, influences opinions and perceptions of the group's activities, then you still have to go down to this idea of language, you know, the language you use, you know, and how that language will be able to penetrate into the audience that, you know, these organizations have recruited. And then it brings us to the point of comparing and trying to understand that for a country like Mozambique, you know, they should be looking at countries like Nigeria, where you know, the insurgency movement has had a similar trajectory, but of course, you know, they've got their own peculiarities in Mozambique. You know, we're not saying that they're the same, but if they look at what is happening in Nigeria, what happened in Nigeria before, and what is happening now, do you think that there is a room for lessons to be learned by Mozambique from other countries like Nigeria, or do you think you know, most terrorist organizations are doing their own thing? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Yes, there are a number of lessons to be learned. Firstly, most of these groups brand themselves as the Islamic states or the Islamic State, basically. And despite using local languages, as we said before, like Kanuri or Swahili, there are elements within these groups that try to enforce Arabic as the kind of the main language of state. So the official language of most of these, they want to come across, and you can see that from the way Boko Haram communicates sometimes, where Shekau wants to probably come across like he's speaking in Arabic, so as to get the sympathy of Islamic State across the Middle East or North Africa. So like Arabic is seen as the language of state. Mm-hmm. But in terms of how the kind of lessons that they can learn from Nigeria, I think Mozambique has a lot of lessons to learn, in the sense that how Nigeria managed the beginning of the uprising could be something that Mozambique can benefit from, because the initial confrontation between the police and or the relationship between Mohamed Yusuf and the politicians, whereby there was an attempt to use his group for as following, and also as a kind of constituency, which did not really work out well, because which then led to them making promises to them and then saying, well, look, these politicians, they are lying, they're not applying Islamic principles. So the one lesson that Mozambique could learn is that politicization of these groups has serious consequences down the line.
That's true.
So another lesson that they could learn is how they manage the initial conflict, because what happened in Nigeria was that there was a violent confrontation where Mohamed Yusuf was killed, and a lot of his followers, I believe around 700 of them.
That's true, yeah.
I mean, that was something that gave Shekau and other people, it acted like a recruiting sergeant for them. That, look, even if you stay here, we will still die anyway. So they will still kill us. So it's better we die fighting, and we might even be able to survive, and we'll go to Jannah. But if we stay here, they will kill us like they killed Mohamed Yusuf and our other comrades.
Yeah.
So that gave the radical elements within within the movement, within the early version of Boko Haram, that gave them like a recruiting sergeant. And they manipulated that to mean that, okay, we really have no option. We are already dead anyway. So we need to go into this thing and fight. So Mozambique need to be careful in the way that they manage the militants in the initial stages.
Yeah.
Because the lessons from Nigeria is that if you do that, then you instead inadvertently give the terrorists a kind of excuse to recruit more people.
Yeah.
So that is another lesson, and there are other lessons like, for example, not ignoring conflicts until they get out of hand, and things like that. But it's very difficult. Each situation is different. We cannot say the situation in Nigeria applies but there are some lessons to be drawn.
Yeah, I'll get Mrs. Joseph's opinion now, but I just wanted to make mention of the fact that you've talked about these lessons, because we've seen how the government of Mozambique has deployed its military to deal with this issue, and we understand that, of course, there is a need to protect territorial integrity, but of course the military is not the optimum solution, as we've seen in many countries. We've seen that in Nigeria. The military has a role to play, but the military is not all the solution. We've seen the Mozambican government deploying a lot of mercenaries from South Africa, the DAG. They haven't done a good job. The situation still remains as it is. Just last week, about 60 military forces were killed by this movement. Some of their armored vehicles were seized and paraded in Mocimboa de Praio. So it tells us that learning lessons are very important. And I've said this time and again, Africa should be a country where when they face this kind of insurgency movements, they can be able to reach out to their fellow partners. I've said that before, that this is a situation where the Mozambican government, should, talk to Nigeria, talk to the military chiefs, talk to the Air Force chiefs and ask them and have a discussion, a strategic meeting on, how do you see your lessons learned? What can you tell us about how we can go forward with this? Of course, a lot of people would say, oh, the Nigerian government hasn't defeated Boko Haram, so they shouldn't be giving lessons. But what people fail to understand is that lessons, bad experiences, lessons could be good experiences. You can have all these lessons learned, irrespective of whether you get lessons from somebody who has, succeeded in doing something. So I think, you make some very strong points there. But Mr. Joseph, I wanted to, you wanted to say something very important there.
Actually, this is a question for you guys, because you are in the know-how. My question is that, how is the African, well, again, it goes to African Union, because we know African Union doesn't do anything anyway. So, but in the past, we have seen Uganda and some countries actually sending troops to Somali to combat Al-Shabaab.
Yeah.
Now, is there any country, you have mentioned that South Africa, maybe they have lent a hand to Mozambique. What is the coordination with African countries? Because Nigeria, Somali, Uganda, Kenya, and some other, even South Africa, can they actually come together and just send their compact force to deal with this situation?
I think it's a good question, Mr. Joseph. African countries have always worked under the umbrella of the African Union, and within that space of the African Union, you still have blocks of you've got the North Africans, having their own blocks. You've got the East Africans having the EAC block, the East African community. You've got the South Africans having the SADC. You've got the West Africans having ECOWAS, and the Central Africans with CEMAC. So I think what is happening is these various blocks, they kind of look after their own. And within that space, you still have what you call joint task forces. You know, as Mr. Nana mentioned, in the case of Nigeria, for example, you've got the multinational joint task force, which is involved in Nigeria, of course, in Cameroon, which is it's the troops from all these regional states, Niger and Chad, of course, with Benin. So you've got all these regional forces that are created. But in the case of Nigeria, for example, the multinational joint task force was only created in 2012, and it was already 2 years or 2 to 3 years when Boko Haram had already been very active in the northern part of Nigeria. They were already carrying out attacks. They were already present in areas in Cameroon, Niger, and Chad. But of course, one of the key issues for these bloc countries is they're always thinking that when they get involved in, for example, like how Cameroon got involved in the case of Nigeria, then Boko Haram started its attack in Cameroon in 2013, and then other countries like Niger began to experience attacks, like Chad. So a lot of countries are always concerned, Mr. Joseph, about how they get involved. So for example, in the case of South Africa hasn't actually sent its forces to Mozambique, but private security organizations are operating within Mozambique, and that's a private bilateral agreement. But what we are looking at is for the South African Development Community to get in as a bloc. We're looking at the East African bloc to get involved. But mind you, like Mr. Nana mentioned, when you see what is happening in Somalia, the reason why Kenya has been under attack, why Ethiopia has been under attack, why Tanzania has been under attack, why Uganda has been under attack, is because some of these jihadist organizations say to them, you are involved in the fight in Somalia. So it becomes a scenario where it is either you're in or each country to see themselves as the other themselves you are
Okay.
scenario where everybody wants to do their Mr. Nana, let me hear your.
Yeah, we are losing your line a little bit, David. Yeah, but before Nana actually responds, there is a question here from Tyler Lycan. He's wondering, he wants to know whether there has been any reports of how these Mozambican jihadists, how they are utilizing the maritime space and how they are recruiting the other jihadists and even bringing in arms, and how do they get those things?
Can you hear? Is this all clear now, or are you still getting language?
Let Nana actually answer this while your line settles. Yeah.
Yeah. So there isn't a lot of evidence that they're using the maritime sort of space any more than like just normal kind of like use from time to time, like opportunistic use of the maritime space, because when it comes to jihadist groups, they do not have a lot of air and sea kind of power, because in order to operate in those spaces, you do need the equipment in order to, but there's a lot of piracy going on in the region, and there is a possibility that jihadist groups can actually get involved in piracy as a way of making money, but also as a way of transporting contraband across borders. So the Mozambican movement, I would think, will not be any different, because they're within a maritime maritime state. So that will be a major kind of tool for them but I don't think we can say they are just openly using these spaces, but they would maybe indirectly, maybe using criminal elements, and also trying to um, acquire that kind of capacity to use the maritime space they've got. We haven't seen them, most of these groups, using the airspace much. Um, I'm not aware of Boko Haram or other groups like that using, um, air assets within their fight. But I think David will probably want to add something.
Okay, David.
Yeah.
There is you have room for one more question because the time is actually slipping before we get into Cameroon.
Yes.
Alex Ackerman is saying is that is there a possibility of the Muslim migrants joining the jihadists from other countries, because there is already a big Muslim community in Mozambique. So he wanted to know whether they are recruiting from other countries, but only Muslims, though.
I think it's a very good question. But let me add on the maritime issue and then come to Mr. Akuman's question. For example, we've seen a recent development in Mozambique, the Praia, where the jihadist organization there has seized the port. And as Nana said, of course they are controlling the port at the moment. They may or may not be carrying out any activities because everybody knows they are there and people don't want to do business with jihadists directly. Yes, they have that kind of capacity to seize the port, but whether they can keep it for a very long time, it's another problem. It's something which we haven't seen. Yeah. So yes, they are trying to do that, but I don't know the impact yet. We don't know if they will be able to hold that for a very long time. The Mozambican military is continuously trying to engage them. So it puts them at a state where they will not be as comfortable using it for transactions as one would think. In terms of the recruitment, which Mr. Alex Akuman asked, yes, we would see there is a possibility of Muslims coming in to join the movement within the area. But at the moment, there is a significant recruitment from the local population. And they may have a lot of support from outside, resources coming from outside, but the recruitment base always begins from inside. But in future, there's a possibility that people might be traveling from Tanzania, people might be traveling from Kenya, who identify themselves as Muslims, who can also speak the Swahili language, who can speak the local, Portuguese language, and they may be joining. So that's a very reasonable question to ask. So let's move to Cameroon, Mr.
Yeah, before we go to Cameroon, let us go to intervention a little bit. Yes, you are watching AIL TV. In fact, you are watching Security Update with David Otto from Siso, Stepped In, Stepped Out. Now, you have just heard these gentlemen, they know their stuff. It's always that we don't have enough time to cover these events, but we will be actually, probably every week, we will be adding kind of, or extend it a bit more. So, and also viewers, thank you very much for your questions. That's what we really want to hear. We want to hear what you guys are thinking. Ask questions. These guys, they will tell you what they know. So we are going to go to Cameroon. Last week Cameroon is being featured 2 times, and this is the 3rd time. You know why? Because things have to be discussed. We know the situation in Cameroon, but as always, I am not expert on Cameroon. David, Otto, you are on.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph, again, and thank you for this opportunity. Thanks to the audience. We would move now to Cameroon and talk about the current situation there. I mean, there was an incident, and the reason why we brought back Cameroon is because we want to talk about this incident, which happened in the the southern part of Cameroon, which is the southwest region. This is an area which is experiencing a separatist war by a movement calling itself Ambazonia. They're situated around the region, which of course it's neighboring Nigeria, exclusively English speaking, and this war has been going on for 3 years. So I want to talk specifically with Mr. Salinana on this subject. We had an incident, Mr. Sali, on just a couple of days ago, a horrible incident which occurred in Moyuka, in one of the southern parts of the southern regions of Cameroon. The question I really want to put to you, Mr. Sali, is can you talk about this incident? I mean, without actually going into so much of the gory details, and can you situate this on the stage that this crisis is? And what is it that the government needs to do? And what is it that some of these separatist leaders need to do in order for these kind of events not to happen? I mean, this was a horrible event, Mr. Sali. Go ahead.
Absolutely, David. This was a horrible and gruesome murder of a 35-year-old woman in the town of Muyuka, which is in the outskirts of Buea, the capital of the southwest region, one of the two Anglophone regions. And what happened was that the separatists had abducted the woman from a motor park and kept her for 3 days and interrogated her, and taken her to the town and actually hacked her with a machete and filmed the incident. They also filmed the interrogation of the woman before the actual execution, and they accused her of being a spy for the government. They use the word blackleg, which is another word for being a spy. So that was the accusation. And so this has caused outrage, understandably, across Cameroon and also internationally. So there have been reactions from the United Nations, condemnations from NGOs, political leaders, and even people within the Anglophone movement. But that wasn't the only case. There were 5 cases of similar gruesome murders within a period of a week. A pastor was murdered in the town of Batibo, which is in the outskirts of Bamenda, the northwest capital. And there was also another murder in Bamenda city, and as well as the town of Ndok. And all of these murders have one thing in common. The people are being accused of being blacklegs or spies. So there has been outrage for all of these people, especially the one in Batibo, because he was an aid worker, and in addition to being a pastor. So that was also a high-profile murder. But there is a context within which this has come. A number of the factions had actually made broadcasts to call on their supporters to deal with blacklegs and to kill anybody who is deemed to be spying on them or selling secrets to the military or to the government. Or at least 3 factions: the Cho Ayaba faction, the Julius Ayub Tabe faction, and also the Samuel Sako faction their spokespeople had all made statements to call on a kind of escalation of killings of blacklegs. So that is the backdrop that caused this escalation. And the outrage has caused a lot of people to call for intervention by the UN or the international community to stop this war. And but what it is that it has been not a very good kind of initiative or kind of tactic or strategy by the separatists, because these are war crimes, remember, and they recorded them themselves and they claimed them on their Facebook by writing that we did it. They recorded them, they did audios to say that we did it. So it's not a question of doubting who did it. So these are war crimes, and it also puts many people at an awkward position. And even if they support their demands, like the Anglophone demands, this is way too far for a lot of people, that they cannot accept this kind of level of atrocities from the separatists. Of course, there has been cases where government or soldiers have also been accused of similar atrocities. We remember the Ngarabu incident a couple of months ago, where the military was accused of having killed a dozen or so people. And so this happens within this conflict. But I think it's an escalation, in the sense that the strategy for the separatists is that they want attention, and they thought that if they do this, because you can see it from their statements after the incident, calling for UN to intervene, for peacekeeping missions to be sent to Cameroon, for dialogue to be held. So it's also a kind of strategy to push for some kind of attention and dialogue. Or
do you think that strategy is working? I mean, because of course, I watched this video and it's unimaginable. Like as you mentioned, many other videos in the past, and one of the biggest challenges when you're dealing with asymmetric insurgency groups, with the decentralized movement of this nature that we experience in the northwest and southwest regions, it's about identifying who commits what crime, and as you rightly said, it's an escalation because you have these groups that are somehow claiming to have connections with leaders abroad, and leaders abroad claiming to have control of these groups. But when you look at some of these the activities, you can clearly tell that there is really no such thing as control. A lot of these acts are being done for primarily a kind of survival, tactics, to create terror within the local communities. Now, my point that I'm trying to make here is, how do you go forward from here? How do you engage, the government of Cameroon and engage the leaders to a point where these kind of atrocities should stop? I mean, how do you do that?
Yes, I think one of the ways to do it is to put pressure. For example, Human Rights Watch has put out a number of statements about it, which will have an impact on both on the separatists. And also there are people within the Anglophone movement that have also sent out strong statements. That is a way of trying to stop this kind of incidents. But also, I think that whatever the strategy, it hasn't worked properly for the separatists, because they are viewed. This is viewed as terrorism, and this is viewed as punishing your own people. And they need the support of the communities. They need buy-in from communities. And once they do this kind of thing, they lose support from the local population, and there is no guerrilla warfare that can succeed without the support of the local communities. So that is not working in terms of like using this as a way to bring the government and international community to the table. So I think what can the government do? I think there is a need to increase awareness within communities, but for the separatists, as you said, they don't really have control over these groups. Most of these groups are autonomous, even though they have handlers abroad and they have branding under one or the other faction.
Yeah.
A lot of the actions, they are given an order to deal with, for example, deal with blacklegs, but the way they implement that order may not exactly fit the objective of the group that has been doing it. But we have seen similar worse kind of atrocities in other places. So what can the government do? I think it's a question of eventually there has to be some level of engagement between the government and the armed groups.
Yeah,
but
it's going to institute that, because as you know, the UN is going to come up with strong statements that mean nothing. The human rights organizations are going to condemn it in very strong terms. It doesn't mean anything. We've heard that before. Is this something which you think the locals should be able to do rather than wait for the UN or the African Union or all these organizations? Isn't it time for Cameroonians themselves to take matters into their hands and find a solution to this?
Yes, we have seen that a lot of the people like from this week are speaking up. Like we have seen women, for example, coming up with protests with hashtags to say we are tired and we don't want any of this anymore. And communities are starting to say that there must be red lines. There must be red lines. There are certain things that they don't want to be done. So I think
remember how do you implement red lines?
Well, like I think it will be difficult to say they will implement it, but they will be saying most of these fighters are children of those communities.
Yeah.
So they are from those communities. Their parents are there, their grandparents are there, their relatives are there, their families are there. So I think they will be putting pressure on them that I don't want this kind of record in my name, not in my name. Don't do this kind of thing. So there will be pressure from communities against the fighters. There will be also, I think the government will also take advantage because, for example, there has been a swoop in Muyuka whereby virtually everyone has been taken to the gendarme.
Okay, but Mr. Nana, this is not going to solve the problem. Do you think the government should call for a ceasefire? Along with the separatist group, because we've got 2 minutes. Do you think? I mean, what is the immediate thing that will help towards calming this situation down?
As I said before, I don't think there is a silver bullet. Yeah. But if you call for ceasefire, you have to ensure that ceasefire can stand. I'm not sure that if the government call for a ceasefire, that the groups will respect it, or even all sections of the military, gendarmes and the police. So I think that calling for ceasefire is one thing. Some of the factions, like the Akwanga faction, called for a ceasefire, and Julius Ayutabe faction just recently. But we saw that there was no impact.
Yeah.
So I think ceasefire, yes, but I think there is no. What I said before is that there has to be a menu of solutions.
Yeah.
And one is to be engaging, for both parties to be engaging with each other.
Yeah.
It's also for communities to try to put pressure on the separatists as well as the government to reduce the violence, and also to create spaces for people, for communities to be able to do more to protect themselves, because there's no way to put a soldier in every house in every village in the Northwest and the Southwest region. So it has finally to, the traditional authorities have to be also kind of supported to have a say locally, and religious leaders and all these other groups that are formed to kind of put pressure on both parties to say, look, this violence has gone on for 3 years. It's time we kind of like we kind of stop it. So, but I don't think that is one thing that can solve the problem.
I thank you very much, Mr. Sally. You've said it all. There is no one silver bullet to the problems that are going on, either in Mozambique or in Cameroon. I think it's all about engagement. It's all about a multi-agency approach to a solution, bringing all parties on board so that these issues can be addressed. Of course, the purpose of these discussions is to create, this atmosphere where people can understand what are the various solutions that are available and who needs to do what, at what time, and for what purpose. Thank you, viewers, for listening. Thank you, Mr. Sally Nana, for your brilliant expertise and for always, giving us the best that you've always done. I want to appreciate Mr. Joseph for hosting this program and the Africans in London Television. We hope that we shall be back again. Mr. Sally, I hope to see you again very, very soon, because we are not through with this. We still need more time. Mr. Joseph, thank you very much. And viewers, we'll see you again next week, Thursday, same time. And something else will be coming up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. As you have heard the two gentlemen actually discussing matters that are affecting Africa. Now, here is the thing. For you guys viewing, and today actually we had nice interaction, we want more questions. Ask these guys. Or you can actually send in the questions beforehand, because we will be telling you what is coming. Then you can formulate your questions, whatever, whether you want to send a comment or you want to send a question, we are open, or you can send the question directly to David Otto. I'm sure one day he's going to give you his, check him on his Facebook and LinkedIn pages. You can send him your questions there. Now, next week, I'm sure we will be continuing to talk about issues really concerning Africa. And now we are going to go deeper. We want actually to know how can we solve these problems ourselves, because we are always relying on the outside help. And if we can, is it possible? But the conversation continues on social media. This video is going to be available on YouTube and, of course, on Africans in London TV Facebook. So send in your questions. The conversation can continue and should continue. Until then, ciao.